What if I said an entire fortress was brought down by nothing more than a shout? A city securely locked with massive gates and towering walls had stood unconquered for generations, feared by armies and challenged by none. Then came a people without weapons, ladders, or siege engines, only trumpets and silence. For 6 days they circled the city in silence. But on the seventh day, something happened that would resonate through history. This isn't merely about a crumbling wall. It is the story of a fulfilled promise, a nation guided by faith, and a God who wins battles without a single sword drawn. This is the account of Jericho's fall. After 40 years wandering the desert, their journey was close to its end. Israel had walked across the Jordan River on dry land parted by God's power. For the first time, they stood on the soil of Canaan. Joshua, their new leader, guided a nation molded by miracles, divine provision, and compassion. In front of them rose a unique and formidable city, Jericho. Its towering walls dominated the landscape, a heavily fortified city with locked gates and vigilant guards. It had never been breached. Canaan viewed it as impenetrable. For Israel, it was the initial challenge in claiming God's promise. Its formidable presence blocked their path. No one entered or exited not due to Israel's military strength, but because of the fear of their God. Yet this battle wasn't one to be fought with weapons or human might. The victory over Jericho was God's to claim. Even before the Israelites entered Canaan, Joshua had secretly dispatched 2 men from Shittim to explore the land with a special focus on Jericho. They moved stealthily through the valleys and came quietly to the city, eventually arriving at a humble home built into the city's wall. The home belonged to Rahab, a woman recognized in Jericho, but not for respectable reasons. She was a prostitute living on the societal fringe. But why her? Why would God select someone so disregarded to fulfill a role in his divine plan? Rahab was unlike others. Despite her dishonored status, she had listened to the tales of God who parted the Red Sea, who rained down manna, and who had defeated powerful kings such as Sihon and Og beyond the Jordan. She was moved with awe and reverence, convinced that this God was truly unique. Her soul brimmed with wonder and reverence. She was convinced this God was unparalleled. One night when the king of Jericho learned that Israelite spies had infiltrated the city, he dispatched soldiers to Rahab's house, insisting she surrender them. Rahab was at a crossroads: betray the strangers and secure her safety, or shield them and endanger herself. Summoning bravery, she concealed the spies atop her roof beneath flax stalks. Then, asserting the men had already escaped, she deceived the king's men into chasing them outside the city walls. Once the threat subsided under the moonlit night, she ascended to the roof and addressed the spies. "I recognize that the Lord has granted you this territory. We live in fear of you. Everyone in this region is terrified. We've heard how the Lord opened a dry route for you through the Red Sea. We know how you defeated Sihon and Og. The Lord your God is sovereign above the heavens above and the earth beneath." She then pleaded boldly, "Promise me by the Lord that you will show kindness to me and my family when Jericho falls." Touched by her faith, the spies consented. As a sign, they gave her a red cord to tie on the outside-facing window. They instructed, "Hang this cord on the external window and shelter your family inside. When the Lord hands Jericho over, none of you will be harmed." Then Rahab assisted them in escaping, lowering the spies down by a rope from her window. The men retreated into the hills, hiding 3 days while Jericho stayed tightly shut. Eventually, they returned to Joshua bearing one message: "The Lord has indeed given this entire land into your possession." So as the Israelites stood across the Jordan, Joshua recalled the spies' report. Bolstered by their testimony, he began mobilizing the people for battle. Yet the next directive defied military logic: no ladders, rams, or siege engines. Instead, God instructed Joshua in a remarkable way: circle the city once per day for 6 days with 7 priests sounding ram's horns before the ark. On day 7, circle it 7 times, then sound the trumpets. At the long blast, instruct everyone to shout loudly. The city walls will then fall. It seemed absurd, even childish. But Joshua understood that God's ways surpass human reasoning. He gathered the people and explained the plan. Note the original mentions a channel subscription plugin likely unrelated to the core biblical narrative, so it's omitted here for academic coherence. On the first day, the Israelites assembled in silent compliance and resolve. Watched by Jericho's guards, they proceeded in disciplined formation around the city walls. Leading them, 7 priests bore the Ark of the Covenant, the holy emblem of God's presence. As they marched, the soul sound breaking, the stillness came from the solemn blasts of 7 rams' horns resonating as if summoned from heaven. Jericho's guards peered from their walls, bewildered by the unusual ritual. By the second and third days, Jericho's soldiers began to jeer and ridicule. Is this just some foolish ceremony? No assault, no warfare. What kind of tactic is this? But by the 5th and 6th days, their mockery shifted to uneasiness. The constant circling the stillness, broken only by the sound of horns, made it clear this was no ordinary confrontation. The atmosphere in Jericho began to shift. Marketplaces were deserted, shutters drawn. A wave of fear crept through the guards, who now stood rigid atop the walls, their gaze locked on Israel's camp. The Israelites marched silently. They marched and Jericho could only watch. Everything was in place. The Israelites had followed the instructions. The ark had been carried. The priests had blown their horns. And the walls stood in silent suspense. As dawn's first rays broke the horizon, the Israelite camp awakened with intent. This was not just any day. It was the 7th day, the day destiny would unfold. Jericho's sentinels observed from above, their eyes fatigued and anxious. Joshua moved through his people, his expression serene, but filled with unwavering determination. The priests assumed their places, bearing the Ark of the Covenant with solemn respect. 7 of them gripped rams' horns near their mouths, poised for the signal. The people lined up behind them. Everyone was prepared. Then came the clear command march. And so they marched. Once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5, 6. The guards on Jericho's walls had ceased their mocking. Now they stood paralyzed with fear. The 7th lap began. The priests lifted their horns and released a thunderous sound. Joshua addressed the people, his voice cutting through the echoes. Shout, for the Lord has delivered the city to you. And they obeyed. A tremendous cry erupted from thousands of Israelite throats, unlike any sound Jericho had ever known. A sacred war cry brimming with faith, fervor, and intensity. The ground beneath them quivered. Their shouts split the sky like a tempest in the hills. And then it occurred. A groan, a rumble, a shattering noise. The very earth under Jericho began to move. The massive, formidable walls, constructed to repel invaders, caved inward as if under divine pressure. Stones exploded like fragments. The foundations gave way. Towers toppled into clouds of debris. Screams rang out across the city. In mere moments, Jericho's impregnable defenses lay in ruins. The Israelite soldiers surged into the city. With its defenses breached, Jericho fell swiftly. Yet one house stood firm, Rahab's dwelling. Inside, she was surrounded by her family, parents, siblings, and extended kin. Holding her breath, she clung to the hope born of obedience and belief. Now all she could do was trust. Then 2 men appeared. It was them, the very spies she had once concealed beneath the flax on her roof. They had returned to fulfill their promise. Rahab, they called, come quickly. Come. True to their oath, the spies escorted Rahab and her entire household out of the city before its downfall was complete. They were taken beyond the boundaries of the Israelite camp to undergo a ritual purification. Yet that was not the end of her journey. Rahab was not merely saved, she was embraced, integrated, and became part of God's chosen people. Her former life no longer shaped her identity. It was her faith that defined her. The rest of Jericho was consumed by fire. All of its contents were destroyed except for the silver, gold, bronze, and iron, which were dedicated to the treasury of the Lord. This triumph was not by human hands, it was God's alone. As smoke billowed over the city's destruction, Joshua addressed the Israelites and proclaimed a curse over Jericho's remains. Cursed be anyone who attempts to rebuild this city. He will lay its foundation at the price of his eldest son and erect its gates at the cost of his youngest. Jericho's fall was not merely a military achievement, it marked a profound spiritual victory. It demonstrated to all of Canaan that the God of Israel actively fought for his people. News spread rapidly. Nations grew fearful. Rulers began forming alliances in anticipation of Joshua and the God-empowered Israelite force. For the Israelites, Jericho's collapse served as a trial of their willingness to follow God. Had they relied on human tactics, they would not have succeeded. But through obedience, despite the instructions seeming irrational, They witnessed God's divine intervention. For Rahab, it marked a fresh start. She was no longer identified as Rahab the harlot, but Rahab the believer, now integrated into Israel's lineage. She later wed Salmon, a man from the tribe of Judah. Together they bore a son named Boaz, the same Boaz who would eventually take Ruth as his wife. Their lineage produced Obed, who became the father of Jesse, the father of King David. And from this line, many generations later, came Jesus the Messiah. Just imagine Rahab, a foreign prostitute from a doomed city, was chosen to be part of the direct ancestry of the King of Kings. Why? Because she had faith. Because she lived out that faith. She sheltered the spies, tied the scarlet cord, and placed her life in the hands of Israel's God. The tale of Jericho isn't merely a historical event. It is a mirror showing God's might, his unwavering loyalty, and his gentle yet persistent call to trust him, especially when things make no sense. God's commands to Joshua and the Israelites appeared unusual, quietly circling a city rather than launching a direct attack with weapons. Only shouting at a specific signal, it defied human reasoning. Yet their willingness to follow even when it seemed senseless unleashed divine power. In many respects, our lives mirror this story. How often do we encounter situations where God's intentions seem puzzling, when the way forward is uncertain and our trust is challenged? At times, he calls us to keep walking one step at a time, even without knowing the whole plan. In such moments, obeying is difficult. It can feel risky and frightening. Yet, just as with Israel, obedience becomes the gateway through which miracles occur. The Israelites overcame Jericho not through might or ingenuity, but solely by God's intervention. Our personal triumphs, whether over guilt, brokenness, addiction, loneliness, injustice, or temptation, are not secured by human force, but by the living Spirit of God acting within and through us. And then there's Rahab. Her story reveals a truth powerful enough to transform lives. No one is outside God's reach. No background is too tainted. No error is too severe. Rahab carried a troubled history existing on society's margins, yet her faith not only spared her life, it wove her into God's redemptive plan. She became a foremother of the Messiah himself. Her journey offers quiet hope to those who feel overlooked or unworthy, assurance that God looks past who we were and calls us into what we are meant to be. So what obstacles stand before you today? Fear, doubt, regrets. Like the walls of Jericho, they may appear insurmountable. Yet when faith combines with obedience, when you trust God beyond your sight, those walls begin to crumble. When he leads, victory follows. Trust him beyond your reasoning and witness what he will accomplish.